because I tend to. We at the Chamber have set up these sector meetings to ensure that our business community has an opportunity to provide insight and feedback to our City Council on the impacts of a B&O tax on their individual sectors before it goes in front of Council for vote in the first quarter of 2021, with a proposed B&O tax to start in 2022. What we know from our meetings with the city is that they will be proposing a B&O tax to help with the city's projected general fund deficit. The general fund is the fund that pays for parks and recreation, human services, our police department, city administrative, and also city improvements. The city believes with the increases in population, they will need additional dollars to sustain the services that they currently provide to our community. I'm going to admit somebody really quickly here. Currently, we haven't seen a draft on how the B&O tax will impact certain businesses and their sectors. However, we wanted to make sure that we still provided an opportunity to our businesses to voice their concerns or ask any questions or provide feedback to our city council and to our city. I want to thank our council members, Deputy Mayor Claude DeCourcy and Councilmember Bob Baggett for being on today's call. We really appreciate it. Also, we want to thank Jamie Thomas, who is the city's financial director, for being on this call, as she always is the one that has to answer the hard questions. So I really appreciate her just being able to be on these calls because it definitely helps our business community and us understand it more. I want to thank Deb Casey from Green River College, who is today's board liaison and will be providing feedback to the chamber board on the meeting, as well as being a resource to you if you have additional questions or concerns after this meeting that you want our board or the city to be aware of. Please, at this time, make sure you place yourself on mute if you aren't speaking, so that we can make sure that we're hearing everybody while they are speaking. So if you want an opportunity to talk, make sure that you just feel free to jump in when there is a lull, or go ahead and use the raise the hand, and I will try to grab you as soon as I can to ask your question or provide feedback, or also there's the chat option. But at this time, we can go ahead and get started, and I would love to open this up for Deb Casey, if you have any opening remarks or questions or feedback, and then we'll get started.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure you all had a busy day at work and you're here with us, so we really appreciate that. And I want to echo what Casey was already saying, that this is an opportunity for the city as well as for the chamber to hear from our members and to be able to provide insight on what the impacts would be of this tax on all of you. So I graciously thank you for joining, and we will diligently make the reflections of the notes that you are sharing with us and bring those back to the appropriate entities, so they're hearing voices from our local businesses. So what we want to do tonight is give you a chance, and there are a few of you, so maybe we could just quickly go around to know which businesses you're representing from the hospitality and food area. So Kevin, would you mind starting?
Yep. I'm actually with the city. I'm the assistant finance director, Deb.
That's fine. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Richard?
Hi, I'm Richard Sturgis. I'm with Verity Credit Union, and I'm on the chamber board. So I'm here to listen and learn as well.
Thank you. Suhoon?
Hi, I'm Suhoon Tan. I'm the Director of Auxiliary at Green River College, and I oversee our event management and food service contract.
Councilman Baggett, did you want to share anything?
Just, I'm glad to be here and participate in these things. And like Richard said, I'm here to listen and learn.
Thank you. Claude?
Thank you, Deb. Yeah, so it's really a pleasure to be here tonight. And I'm actually involved in all these meetings except one from last night because I had a conflict. So I'm making sure that I can hear from all the businesses in the community in every one of these meetings. So glad to be here.
Thank you. Jamie?
Hi, I'm Jamie Thomas. I'm with the city. I'm just very eager to get any feedback that you guys have to provide us, suggestions, recommendations. This is our 5th meeting, and I've learned something from every single one of these meetings from talking to the business community, and I really appreciate the time and effort that you have put in to give us feedback. We really appreciate it.
Cheryl?
Hi, I'm Cheryl from the Downtown Auburn Cooperative, and I'm representing the businesses in the BIA area. And I also have my kids own Rail Hoppin' Brewery, so I have an interest there too.
Thank you, Cheryl. Jim? You work so hard to mute. Now you can unmute. Maybe we'll come back to Jim. Robert? Y'all can still hear me, right? Okay. All right, Jim.
Hello.
Go ahead, you're on.
Oh, okay. This is Jim Wilson. I'm a investor in a couple of restaurants and establishments in downtown Auburn. And my opinion is that this B&O tax, on top of what they're suffering through right now and going through, is not a good thing.
Thanks, Jim. We'll look forward to some more insights from you as we open up for more. And then just Robert West, I don't know if you want to share anything.
Can you hear me?
All right, well, since Jim, you're still on, maybe we'll start with you. Did you have any reflections that you wanted to share directly with the city?
Well, you know, I'm not sure. I'm just kind of getting into this thing, but as far as the city's concerned, I'm not sure why they're doing it. I mean, if they're behind on, they need to get more money. They should be looking someplace else besides the restaurants that are already hurting. And they can tell the city, I'm going to be doing everything I can between now and whenever they take a vote to stop this. Petitions are going up next week, and businesses are going to be. Businesses are going to be. I think we've got too many voices on there, backbeat or something. Hello.
Go ahead, you're still there, Jim.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to be doing petitions out in the next week or 2 weeks to do all the businesses downtown Auburn and protest this thing. And I've already got a good share of people that have already expressed an interest in not in vetoing it or saying that they're not going to go along with it. So just more to come. I'm just getting warmed up on this thing and thought I'd listen to what everybody had to say tonight.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone
How
else?
do I get off?
Robert, I noticed that you had come off your mic. Did you have something you wanted to share? Okay. This is also,
If I'm correct, I think that Robert is from one of our hotels. I think it is the Holiday Inn. So he's probably representing, oh, he's got his hand right. Go ahead, Robert.
if you're talking, your mic is still on.
You just have to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. I'm just not technologically
up to speed on trying to use a cell phone for this. No, I'm just listening in tonight. Thank you.
Okay. So are there other concerns or questions that people might have that they'd like to have answered or share? Go ahead, Suhoon.
I guess I'm just curious to learn more about what the city is thinking in terms of what do you think is the amount of income you can generate from this tax, and how are you determining what income level are you using for a threshold? If you have more specifics on the proposal.
Yes, absolutely. I can share some of those details. So even though we're still in the process of drafting our ordinance, which would include a lot more of the details around the definitions of doing business and exemptions, deductions, and credits and that sort of thing, we do have a lot of flexibility in the code as far as our reporting thresholds for reporting requirements, as well as the actual tax rate. To kind of backtrack a little bit about how we've gotten where we are right now, we've seen this fiscal imbalance between our revenues and our expenditures coming for actually quite some time, and we've got very limited ways to either increase our revenue or diversify our revenue base. Most of the general fund revenues, so general fund being the fund that supports all of the general services that the city provides, public safety, transportation, etc. We are mostly supported by sales tax, utility tax, and then property tax is actually our largest revenue source. All of those revenue sources, we have statutory limits on what we can actually do with them. Property tax, as many of you may know, is limited to 1% growth each year, which for the city translates to an additional $250,000 every year if we levy the additional 1%. Sales tax obviously follows the economy, so the economy is doing well. Sometimes we see higher rates of increase year to year. Other years it's flat or negative. It's similar to what the businesses are seeing at the same time. But very rarely do we see sales tax rates increase year over year more than 2%, especially in the last couple of years. And it's actually negative this year, as you would expect. We have other ways to help us balance our general fund and support our general fund expenditures, and that is our charges for services. So those are the services that we are able to charge for. Mostly that comes out of our permitting and economic development department. So when developers come in to the city and they want to do work or do improvements in the city, there's a permitting cost associated with that. We don't have a 100% cost recovery model on that, because we do recognize that there's a benefit citywide to encouraging development and money being invested into the city. So there is a little bit of a general fund or a tax, an argument for why tax would subsidize some of those services. So that really then brings us back to how can we increase our tax? We don't have control over the amount of sales tax that we bring in, and we don't have control other than that 1% in our property tax. We do have a little bit of control on our utility tax rates that we charge on our city-owned utilities, but similar to a B&O tax, it is regressive and it's put squarely then on homeowners. Also businesses, because businesses also pay utilities, we realize that, but the lion's share of our utility taxes then are imposed on our residential users. And so we don't want to put 100% of the burden on them. So as we've gotten closer to this gap between our revenues and expenditures, so on average, our revenues increase about 2% every year. And like all businesses, the largest piece of our general fund costs are our employees, and the cost for employing people tends to increase more than 2% every year, in addition to all the other non-payroll costs, which also tend to increase more than 2% each year. So that's where we have this imbalance between revenues and expenditures. And when we get out in the next 2 to 4 years, we see an average gap between those revenues and expenditures to be about 10 to 12 and up to 15 million each year as we go out into those further out years. So what we're looking So this is the part that answers your questions. We really need to bridge on average $10 million a year. And one of those, we're really looking at 3 different ways to get at that $10 million. One is the utility taxes that I mentioned. I'm doing a small increase on the utility taxes. The B&O tax is the other piece. And then we're also looking at, in the next 2 to 4 years, maybe even considering either a metropolitan park district or a property tax levy. But those would all require a vote of the public. So those aren't councilmanic tax options for us like the B&O tax is. So that being said, even though we have a $10 million gap in the next couple of years, we're looking in this first biennium in 2022 to really look to use B&O tax to fill a $4 to $6 million gap. So we're trying to back into and find a threshold and a rate that's palatable, as palatable as possible. I understand that this isn't easy. It's for anybody. It's certainly not easy for the city. It's even harder for businesses. I do recognize that. But we're trying to find a rate that gets us to meet that minimum amount of revenue that we're looking to raise through B&O tax, which is that $4 to $6 million. So what that means for businesses is we're really looking at starting at a threshold of gross revenues of $500,000. And we're even actually looking at maybe even a threshold even higher than that, maybe $750,000. I do want to remind that the gross revenues doesn't necessarily mean taxable revenue. That would just mean that's the threshold in identifying whether or not you would be subject to the B&O tax or not. So from there, you would take any exemptions, deductions, or credits that a business may be eligible for in calculating the taxable revenue. The rates that we're looking at, statutorily by state law, the maximum rate that we can charge on any of the services across the city is 0.2%. We're not looking at needing anywhere near that much. We're, depending on the industry, we're probably going to propose a tiered or a structured rate depending on industry, with a lower rate for the lower margin industries like hospitality, like restaurants and retail. So we're looking at probably about 0.05% on businesses like that, and maybe anywhere up to 0.1% on some of the higher margin businesses. But those are the numbers that we're working with right now to get to our $4 to $6 million. A lot of this, there's some science in it. A lot of it is, I hate to say, kind of a guessing game, because we have very little data as far as the businesses that would actually have nexus in Auburn. Right now, we only have data for the businesses that have business licenses in Auburn. And the way B&O tax works is there's a lot of businesses that would be paying Auburn that don't actually have a physical presence in Auburn, but would have nexus with B&O tax in Auburn. So we don't know what we don't know, and we don't want to set a rate that's too high and overly burdensome if it's not what we need. It's not a cash grab for us. We're trying to keep that rate just low enough to get us what we need to bridge those revenue and expenditure gaps in the next couple of years.
Hi, this is Cheryl from the Downtown Auburn Cooperative. And like I said before, I'm working with the BIA members downtown. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just going to say that I really think at this time it's a bad idea, because these businesses seriously are on the verge of closing. They don't want to take out any more loans to try to stay open. They've gone into debt to try to stay open. They're really looking at, do I bail now? And when you say that it doesn't go into effect till 2022, their response is yes, but we don't know how we're going to recover from this. We don't know what it's going to be like. Are people going to come back? Are they still going to get, are they going to be in the routine of not coming out all the time? How long is this going to take us to recover? We have to start paying all these loans back. They're in pretty dire need right now. I had a couple meetings today that are seriously talking about closing their doors. So to breach this subject with them right now is very difficult. They don't want to talk about it. They just are worried about just trying to survive. And that would be the majority of the restaurants downtown, some breweries downtown, some retail downtown. It's like, how far can they stretch it? How far? I know one business that was not in debt at all when they started, and they're $80,000 in debt now from loans, just trying to stay alive, when they're only getting about 25% of the business. So their futures are not looking good. And so when you talk about wanting to put a tax, they already pay the BIA fee. They already pay a B&O tax to the government. A lot of them pay the transit fee because they're close to the transit center and they're not getting much revenue, and those bills still have to be paid. Landlords are getting where they don't want to work with them anymore. They want their money too. So I guess I'm just saying the other side of it. I don't know what the answer is. I can get the city side, and I understand their deficit, but what are we going to do if we have no businesses there at all? So that's my opinion.
That's great feedback. And I appreciate that. Just the more we hear how businesses, particularly our smaller businesses and our restaurants, are hurting right now because of the current climate. It really does help kind of drive home the point to us and the businesses that we need to make sure that we're protecting and watching out for, because to your point, we understand very clearly if we drive business away, that's not a net gain for us, that's a loss for us. And we need businesses to do well in the city. But you did bring up a point on the BIA that I wanted to make sure that the rest of the group knows. One of the provisions that we are writing into the code under the credit section is a credit for BIA. So any tax that any business that would be responsible for paying and filing B&O tax, they could take a credit up to the amount of BIA that they've BIA fees that they've paid. So there wouldn't be hopefully that double taxation feeling for the businesses that are paying a BIA fee as well. And then something that we kind of, again, it was just something that I threw out last night as a brainstorming. This isn't, I don't even know how I would write it yet. So any feedback and ideas on how we could approach it, but how can we bring COVID into maybe into the credit section of our code? So if there are businesses, hopefully this isn't still an issue in 2022, but it's hard to say. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be lasting effects from this year in 2022. So is there a way that we can quantify, or how do we capture those COVID impacts and business closures on those businesses and applying a credit for those businesses when they're in the beginning of 2022, if there's still that lasting impact? I don't know if maybe it's a write-off of interest from loans that a business had to take out in order to stay open for this past year. It's just a very high-level concept. I mean, any recommendations or ideas that you or some of the businesses you work with have, we would love to consider, because again, I can't reiterate enough how much we want to protect those businesses that are really struggling right now, because they're critical for the city.
One of the questions that came up with them, and someone did know about the provision with the BIA fees. Will the BIA fees still be handled in the same way? Will they still go deposit in the BIA, and then the BIA funds those out like they're doing now? Or is there going to be a change to that?
There hasn't been any proposal to change the way the BIA fees are and how those funds are collected and distributed or paid out. It would just be a credit of, if a business pays $100 into the BIA, then that would be $100 less in B&O tax that business would have to pay.
Okay, thank you.
So JB, I think the hard thing is that I appreciate you trying to look at ways to help people that are stressed about COVID right now, because it's a hot topic on our businesses, and it is you know, it is a huge strain, right? So you do appreciate the fact that we want to keep our small businesses and everything, but what's going to be hard is that our small businesses aren't going to provide you a solution to how to help write your B&O credits because they don't want the B&O, right? So I appreciate the fact that you're trying to look at ways to write this, but I don't think that very many people are going to offer up a solution on how to write in a way to have a B&O tax to help, because also you have to understand that we have large businesses that really serve our community, like Orion or Boeing or Green River. They are strapped because of this as well, right? So it's not just our small businesses that are affected by COVID. It is every single business that has had to take some type of shutdown or loss or laying off employees. I mean, it's not just small businesses. So when we look at how are we going to protect our businesses, we really, it's overall, because our larger businesses are ones that are eating at our small restaurants, right? The zones that want to bring over their, their people at their lunch break and they're coming over to eat at our restaurants, but then they can't get in because they're small. But zones is having to lay off people because they're not, it is a trickling effect across all of our businesses in this area when it comes to COVID. So getting those suggestions probably aren't going to happen because it's too hard to say right now how COVID is really going to make a lasting impression on all of our businesses, not just small businesses. Unfortunately.
And Jamie, I will tell you that the average at least Casey, you're right. I understand what you're saying. It's totally right. But the average businesses in the BIA area are down to only 20% of what they were making. I'd say between 20 and 25%. That's how bad it is right now. Part of it is because people are afraid to come in. People are afraid. It's wintertime. Nobody wants to eat outside. I mean, there's a lot of things. And Casey's right. We don't know how long this is going on. Do we really think that come January that the restrictions still won't be on? No, most people think they still will be on. And so to get the businesses on board with a BIO or B&O tax right now, it just angers them because they don't even know if they're going to be here.
Casey, can I jump in for a minute?
Absolutely.
Thank you. For the people on Zoom and on the call tonight, let me kind of give you the council perspective on this. And while Councilmember Bag and myself cannot discuss specifically issues related to pending legislation, but we can give some background information and where this is at. So first, let me say that I understand the business community well. All three of my children own and operate businesses. My daughter has just recently started a business here in Auburn. So she's a startup and she's just getting going. I have an older son who owns and operates 2 franchise restaurants down in the Portland area. And he's laid off 40 of his employees. He got the PPP loan and he's not going after another one of those again. And the governor in Oregon is putting even more restrictions in place on those businesses as well. The only one who's doing well is my son in Peoria, Arizona, who owns and operates an Amazon Prime delivery service. And of course, Amazon's going crazy with delivery, so he's able to keep his 75 employees going and doing well with that. For us in Auburn, and Jamie explained some things very well, a couple things. First of all, council first started hearing this and these conversations over 2 years ago. And that's when former director Shelley Coleman was our finance director, who brought forward to the council the issues we were facing in out years going from 2022 to 2026. And of course, none of us imagined we would be in the situation we're in now being hit with this global pandemic, which has just exacerbated the issues, as we know, for everybody. We also, during this time, had some cuts in revenues from the state. So City of Auburn, as well as some other larger cities, received what is known as the Streamlined sales tax mitigation. That is a process that was going to be sunsetted by the legislature. They reinstated it, and then the governor vetoed it out. And that was put in place during the Great Recession to allow cities to kind of recapture their loss in sales tax revenues from the Great Recession. In 2020 alone, that meant more than $2 million for the city in lost revenues. We also look at the losses we experienced in 2020 related to COVID, and we were looking at about a $6 to $7 million loss. And Jamie and her staff brought forward to council some ways where that could be mitigated. And I have to tell you, the department directors of the City of Auburn did a yeoman's job on making sure they were able to make different cuts within their areas, holding off on hiring, if you will, in some areas. We had layoffs of all of our part-time employees, so like Park and Rec, so they weren't doing any Park and Rec work. So, all the people that provide those services were furloughed. In other ways where we could kind of get whole. And we did pick up some sales tax revenue from businesses as things started to pick up a little bit. And the staff was able to provide council with enough of a cut, if you will, that brought us even in 2020. That's just 2020. Now, the other thing is that we this year in March, just as COVID was hitting, had a 2-day council retreat with Jamie and her staff and the mayor on our preliminary budget discussions. And we have completed our budget discussions. We have passed the budget. By law, we have to have a balanced budget. We cannot go into a deficit. So by state law, we have to have balanced budgets for the cities. And it's a challenge to get there when we're getting there. So again, the department directors, they don't provide any fluff in their budgets. They give us real down-to-earth numbers of how to operate their different departments within the city. This whole thing overall is no different than any business. We have two options. We raise revenues or we cut expenses. And as a growing city, we're going to continue to grow. Cutting expenses usually means layoffs. It means cutting services, and it means other factors that the city would not be able to provide to the residents of Auburn. So we have to take that into consideration as well. And then kind of lastly, we've heard in some of these meetings where some people have said, well, this is just a done deal. I can tell you it's not a done deal. Your city council has to take a lot of consideration into this initiative, into this legislation. Jamie will be bringing back additional data, information, discussion items to our study sessions, because ordinances come before study sessions before they go to council for full vote. And I can tell you your council will be debating this back and forth in the study sessions before we go to the dais and actually have this come forward to us for a vote. So it's not a done deal. It's still something we have to look at and decide the direction we need to go in with that. I greatly appreciate the input from all these businesses. We've heard from, again, except for last night when I wasn't able to attend, but I was briefed on last night of all the input we're receiving from all the businesses. And I can tell you, not only Jamie and Kevin will take all that into consideration, as well as the mayor, your city council will take that under consideration as well as we go through our deliberations and look at and how we do this. And another important point is Jamie mentioned these thresholds. So having an opportunity to look at exemptions within the B&O and how the city council would look at those exemptions and how we would put those exemptions in place for the businesses. So that will also be, and Jamie's already brought forward some data on that, but that will also be quite a discussion that your council will have in relation to that information that Jamie will bring us into the different aspects of what the thresholds do, how many businesses are involved in those various thresholds, what the revenue sources could be, and how that would be applied overall. So again, bottom line is we have a lot of discussion, deliberation, and considerations we need to make before this comes before council in the first quarter of next year.
Jamie, I have a question again. I'm sorry about when you were talking about the BIA fees and giving credit. So one of the questions that came up from a restaurant today was, so if they pay their BIA fee and say they owe $300, whatever, in B&O tax, how does that, if the BIA money is going into the same fund, because it's supposed to be for the business improvement area, how does that then help the city?
Well, it kind of goes back to, we're looking to generate $4 to $6 million, and how we structure our thresholds and our rates will kind of give us an idea of how much total revenue that would generate for us. Honestly, a $300 credit from some of our smaller businesses isn't going to be really that significant in getting us to our $4 to $6 million. So even if it means that we need to increase the rate, even a small, I mean, it would be a fractional amount to make up the BIA write-offs. That's an option. So I guess there's a lot of different ways that we can play with the rates and the thresholds, and when we can take the credits into consideration, but not to make it sound insignificant, those BIA fees that are paid is really going to be a small portion of the overall B&O tax we expect to collect from all of the other businesses throughout the city. Did that answer your question?
Well, kind of. I guess maybe I didn't word it right. So what they're concerned about is they pay the BIA fees to get improvements in downtown, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you take a credit for the B&O tax, they want to know, then are those fees not going to be used for the improvements downtown? Will it just, the credit would just be taken off and given to the city for the B&O tax? So what they're worried is about having the money that they were paying into for the improvements. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that's why we don't plan to change the BIA structure. So all of the money that those businesses are currently paying into the BIA and how that money is currently distributed and spent will continue to occur just as it is. But if a business pays, let's say, that $300 into the BIA, but their tax due on the B&O tax side is $500, we would give them a direct write-off of anything that they already paid in BIA towards their B&O tax. So then it would only be $200 in B&O paid. So, and those are just, I just grabbed numbers out of the sky. What they're currently paying in BIA, though, will continue to be invested the same way it currently is.
Okay, thanks for explaining that.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a little less than 20 minutes left. Is there other additional either comments from the city and anyone else? Soo-Hoon, do you feel like we have answered what we needed?
Yeah, I was mostly trying to get an understanding of what the proposed structure would be like. I guess I am kind of curious about the exemptions that you are discussing to consider, just from Green River College perspective. And personally, I've always found it a little bit strange that we're a state entity, but we also pay sales tax to the state. So it's like, you know, you're moving money around. So I'm just kind of curious about the exemptions as well that you would consider.
So the exemptions that we're starting off are actually the exemptions that are in the model ordinances, which are exemptions that we are required by law to provide. just trying to think off of my head. I mean, there's a lot of like nonprofit, not a lot of nonprofit. Nonprofits aren't exempt off the top because some nonprofits aren't really nonprofits, but more like social and human service type nonprofit organizations. A lot of those activities are exempt. Certain daycares are exempt. Credit losses on an accrual basis are exempt. Write-offs at the sale. So if any credits that are applied towards the purchase of something that which depending on how a company reports their revenues, those write-offs or those deductions can be applied directly towards the sale price when calculating gross revenue. Those are really kind of the most common exemptions and deductions. Just certain activities. But again, it's not the exact same as the Washington State B&O code. We have a different set of exemptions and deductions that we have to do. But most cities with the B&O code add very little to those prerequisite exemptions and deductions. Some cities that have, let's say, a large manufacturer, let's say like Boeing operating, a lot of times they have special exemption and deduction provisions written into their code to protect certain portions of the airplane manufacturing process. Not entirely though, because Boeing usually ends up being a very large payor in like Marysville and Renton, or in Everett, Marysville and Renton. And so, but they will sometimes build in exemptions for very specific pieces of the manufacturing process. So that's kind of an idea. I think I'm trying to think of membership dues are usually always exempt. So it just depends on the activity, but that's the basis we'll be starting with in our code is those prerequisite exemptions and deductions. And talking to the nonprofits last week, there's a couple of exemptions that I'm going to be clarifying in our code to make sure that those services are very clearly exempt so we can continue. We want to make sure that there's a certain essential services that our nonprofits are providing in the city, and we don't want to make sure that they're paying tax on that. So that's where we're starting from. And similarly, we also pay sales tax for activities in Auburn as well. So it's circular, you know, we aren't exempt from each other.
Yeah, that's always been a little strange to me. Before this, I was in Nevada. I moved here about 2.5 years ago. And I worked for a university in the state of Nevada, and we wouldn't pay sales tax to the state because we're a state entity. So moving to Washington is just like, oh, that's new and different, but quite grasp my head around it.
We have a way of really layering the taxes on. And yeah, and unfortunately, and as a taxpayer myself, it is. We have a lot of layered taxes, and unfortunately for cities, it's not the cities that are actually collecting that tax. It is the state and it's the county. And so, yeah, the state and the county have pretty deep pockets when it comes to the taxes that they collect, both on property tax and sales tax, and B&O tax, because the state has their own B&O tax. But the cities just have very little room in the types of taxes that we can raise and levy.
I'd like to make one final comment, and this is just an opinion comment to the councilman. My concern is I get totally what you're saying. You know, everybody has to balance their budget. I've worked in sales before, was a sales manager. I understand that. My really concern is causing an uproar in the business community. The business, the owners of the buildings now are getting involved with this B&O thing. They're revolting against it. They want to do something about it because they're not all getting paid either, because not everybody can pay their rent right now with what's going on. So it's kind of rolling downhill, I should say. So that is my biggest concern, is keeping everybody on a level keel here and not having a big uproar in the business community. So that's just my final comment.
And Cheryl, I greatly appreciate that. This is Claude. And again, you know, your city council as elected officials are elected by the people to serve our constituents. And that's everybody. That's not just a few select people. So we take all that into consideration, as I said, and our discussions and deliberations will have those elements of the discussion in them before we come to any kind of conclusion on this matter.
Thank you.
Well, I personally want to thank Cheryl and Suhoon for sharing their questions and reflections to us. And Jamie, thank you for answering them. And the city and the city council members who joined us tonight. We greatly appreciate the work we do collectively. And some of these decisions and these actions are hard, but there are things that we need to talk about and explore to make the best decisions for Auburn. So the chamber really is so appreciative of being able to be a part of this and bringing people together to have the conversation, especially for our members. So I'm going to hand it back over to Casey for any last things. And again, we will be summarizing this work. And for tonight's session, I'll be sharing some reflections back to our board.
Yeah, I just want to, just like Deb said, thank everybody for coming today. I know that this is a busy season, and taking this time out, I really do actually appreciate it, and I appreciate these conversations. I feel like I need to send Jamie bottles of wine after these sector meetings, as she has taken the brunt of some really tough questions, because, you know, we as business people have to answer tough questions every single day as ourselves. And I know that you understand we have to answer tough business questions. And unfortunately, you are getting those tough business questions from us right now. So we do appreciate it. We have a couple more sector meetings. And then once we recap all of this information, again, we're going to be putting it out to the city and then also to our businesses, and hopefully be able to provide that communication that was needed for our council and our city to have wonderful study sessions around it. So thank you everybody for attending today.
Casey and Jamie, we need to meet at Rail Hoppin' for a beer.
Yeah.
When you guys are all done with this.
Yeah, we don't want any impartial
Yeah, we'll do
appearance.
it afterwards.
Yeah.
That's what I said. Afterwards, we can do it. That's fine.
Great idea.
I think we'll all drink to that.
Yeah.
I'll just want to be able to meet in a restaurant.
Yeah.
True.
Whatever we need to drink. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.